This is the number one reason why a brand needs to own the raw version of their brand and domain name online. Hey, Chris Zuiker with Media Options, help companies to acquire the raw version of their brand, broken to the best domains of the planet. Check that out over at MediaOptions.com. Check out ChrisZuiker.com. Download my book if you have not already done it, .com Strategies. And check that out. It's a free read. You can see it at the bottom of my site, ChrisZuiker.com, also Media Options, the resource tab. Anyways, I've been meaning to do this video for a while. It was a UDRP that came up back in May, and I was like, wow, that is almost the perfect example of the first dimension to my 7 dimensions. Okay, the 7 dimensions are global positioning, industry positioning, branding, marketing, SEO, email security, and scaling, or the ability to pivot. And interestingly enough, okay, the first dimension, okay, to the 7 dimensions to how domain name impacts your brand is global positioning. And when I saw this, I was like, yeah, that's it. This is it. This is, I mean, it doesn't get much more clear than this because just the massive the confusion that these two brands have. Okay, the massive confusion actually that one brand created by not owning their raw version of their brand. Now, before I get to it, okay, before I get to the actual domain name, I'm going to tell you the example that I've usually used and that I still do like, and that is Kraken. Okay, it's an example of Kraken and Kraken Rum. And now Kraken Rum launched, they actually launched, from what I can tell, before Kraken Crypto Exchange, but they didn't acquire their domain name. In fact, they probably were offered it. They probably saw it was available. And most likely said, we don't really need it, you know. We're Kraken Rum, okay? And I know this because I've sold domain names into this industry, and it's just like this thought that, we're rum, so we can get away with this. But I think they learned a valuable lesson. And so Kraken Crypto Exchange came along, they acquired it, relatively, probably close to the launch of Kraken Rum. And so you fast forward, Kraken Rum put like $20 million into their, not to say 20, it was like 15 million into the first year. If you kind of calculate that out and just look at the general, maybe they spend anywhere from $50 million to $70 million in advertising over the life of their brand. And yet they have nothing to show for it. I mean, they've really turned out in direct response marketing. Kraken Crypto Exchange took over and they dominate all the conversation for Kraken. And so you look at Kraken today. I mean, some days, depend upon the day, Kraken Rum is like the second or third page. Maybe it squeaks up first, but it doesn't last very long because Kraken Crypto Exchange just has momentum behind it. Okay, so that was an example of of brands. Okay, in different complete industries. Okay, Kraken Crypto Exchange. Listen, they're never going to sell Kraken Rum, but today, if you ask most people, hey, have you heard of Kraken Rum? They're like, no. Have you heard of, what do you think of Kraken? Like, the crypto exchange. Okay, they kind of get it. Like, it's just because the momentum built behind it. But this one is just like, it's like, wow. Okay, so to get rid of the suspense here, it was, the UDRP was with workforce.com and Workforce Software. Now, it's interesting because if you go to these two sites, and probably in post-production, I'll put up to the two different sites in this video at this point here. But if you go to it, they look super, super similar. Now, Workforce Software tried to file a UDRP against Workforce, and I forget the parent company. You can go to the UDRP. I'm just on Domain Name Wire. The company that owned Workforce.com has owned it for a very, very long time, and they've actually used it in their, I think it was like a magazine. They've used it in their branding and marketing. And yet, Workforce Software thought it was a good idea to launch on Workforce Software to build a brand and build their marketing on something they didn't own. They didn't own. And now at some point in here, Workforce Software actually launched, and you can read the story later on. You can read it more in depth. There's several different articles in the domain community. But they created this massive confusion. Now, if you go there and you look at it, like it's super difficult to tell the difference between the two. And if Workforce Software is actually doing marketing and their branding, they're going to call themselves Workforce, okay? Because that's what they are. The software is a descriptor to the product that they use. And this is the difficulty with this kind of domain strategy, is that it's a descriptor. So in the end, you call yourself Workforce. And I'm trying to think here. We get calls on a lot of domain names. In fact, right before I did this video, I got a call from someone, and they're like, hey, do you guys do rural internet? I'm like, no, listen, I'm a guy in the middle of Arkansas, in the middle of the woods. It's not me. I can guarantee you. or they say, hey, I was charged $100 with my credit card. Can you tell me what this is for? I'm like, nah, listen, wrong company. Like, I'm literally a guy in the middle of the woods. We sell domain names. I can guarantee 100% unequivocally, like, I didn't charge a credit card. But it's probably one of these companies. A good conversation with the lady. I was actually talking about rural internet. But this confusion, it just, when you don't create a simplistic and effortless path for your customers, this confusion costs you money. It costs you conversion. It costs you loyalty. Because between these two sites, I mean, they look pretty darn similar to me. I'd probably just say, oh, it's Workforce. Okay, what's the difference? And when you're confused, you're going to go towards what you think is the leader. Okay, because that it communicates that. It was interesting. I was thinking about this analogy. And I was thinking about private label and how today, I mean, we're just, there's private label is just, it's kind of, you get it, right? You go into Walmart, you see great value and you compare it to this brand. You're like, okay, yeah, probably pretty similar. You go over to, Sam's Club, you see it, you're like, it's probably pretty similar. But, there's certain instances where you're like, no, I want to pay for the best. Like, I don't want the private label. Like, I want to make sure that what I'm getting is like quality, and what I'm investing in is the best. And I don't want to go to this other maybe knockoff brand that maybe has something similar, but it's missing these key ingredients like this. So, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's almost like this private label effect, to where this confusion actually is going to impact your conversion. Now, remember, my thesis for this is your domain name equals your brand equity. And when you don't own your brand, and you create confusion, you don't create this simplistic and this effortless path, because at the end of the day, that's what your domain name strategy is about. Okay, it's about impacting your brand equity, and brand equity is loyalty, it's conversion, it's profit. And it's long-term customers, okay? It's like this intangible element to what your brand is. So I often say, like, no one goes and says, man, can you believe Apple owns Apple.com? No, you're like, of course they do. They're the leader in their industry. Of course they do. But the companies that don't own it, you're like, what? You don't own it? Like, I went over here in this confusion. So, what happens is that, and this is why this is the first dimension to your domain names, okay? I mean, every dimension is important. Every dimension, it kind of adds up. It kind of, depending upon how many dimensions you're impacted for your brand, I mean, it's the impact to your brand equity, that's impact that it's costing your brand. And the more you have, the bigger the reason why you need to own the raw version of your brand, and you need to go out and buy it. And so this is the first one. Okay, this global positioning is that if you don't own it, you don't own your brand. You just don't. I was talking to a very big marketer. I forget. I had his book, and I don't have it in this office, in my other offices, but he's a pretty big branding person. And I was asking him, hey, what's your take on domain names? And he said, listen, if you don't own the raw version, you don't own your brand. You don't own your brand. Now, in this case, Workforce Software tried to get a UDRP. They tried to wrestle the domain name from the company, and thankfully, I think this was a good decision. They said, no, you're not getting it. It's staying with the company because they have a trademark. Also, they've owned it for many years. They certainly did not get this domain name in bad faith. They weren't, they also were using it. Okay, and it was a natural evolution for them. You have to own the raw version of your brand. Global positioning. Who owns the messaging for your brand? At this point, I hear a lot of companies say, well, but Chris, I have the trademark. I said, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. That's why I bring up Kraken Rum and Kraken Crypto Exchange. Listen, Kraken Crypto is never going to get into rum and vice versa. But they dominate the messaging. They dominate the communication. They dominate the goodwill. Okay. Now, this intangible thing that it's not just intangible, but the side effect of this is that every time you market your brand, every time you talk about your brand, what you do is you actually give space in your customer's brain for this other brand, because this other person has to say, no, it's not over here. It's not Workforce. Go to Workforce Software. I mean, imagine that. Imagine their customer service teams having to say this all the time. Hey, it's not Workforce. We're Workforce Software, okay? hey, don't go over here, go over here. We're try maybe Shift. Don't go to Shift. We're try Shift. Don't go over here. And so what happens is that because you have to speak about your brand in a negative light, you're actually helping this other company. Okay, now here's the thing. This is why you need and why you want to own the raw version of your brand, especially if there's a lot of players out there. I talk about Hive.com and how there's 12, 15 players out there that have raised over $1 million that have Hive in their brand. Well, guess what? All these other companies, they're having to say, don't go here, we're over here. And so what are they doing? They're actually building up Hive.com. You look at Carrot.com, there's Carrot.co, and there was another Carrot. I just saw some advertising the other day. I was like, gosh, you should have bought it. You should have bought it. And I know the discussions here. So that domain, I think, was bought for $550,000. And anyways, that domain was bought for $550,000. And, these other companies have raised $20 million, right? They should have bought it, and they didn't. They didn't buy it. And, going back and looking at it, these domain names would have been worth, how much more? Significantly more money than if they would have, than the cost of the domain name, okay? And they'll never have another opportunity. In fact, they're always going to have this halo effect, this other brand. They're always going to be driving traffic and driving share of mind just by the simple fact of how they have to communicate their brand, how they have to communicate their customer service, how they have to communicate their emails, okay? Hey, make sure you don't use workforce.com. Go to Workforce Software. I was talking to a biotech company last week also, and I was like, okay, of the 7 dimensions, listen, you're not outward facing, so really, okay, maybe the global position isn't as big, but still you have email security. I said, you'd be surprised at how much email you're going to drive to this other company. Okay, because you're the .org and they're the .com. I said, just by default of you not owning this, every time you have to explain to people as you talk to them, hey, don't go here, go over here. Okay, the same impact. I've seen some of the craziest things, some crazy stories. I've seen the heads of Google, the heads of Microsoft, the heads of some of the VCs and the investment groups literally emailing the wrong company. Okay, in this instance, it was on a .io versus the .com. Our client on the .com. And the other company on the .io, and when they emailed them, they used the .com. They were only emailing one person in the company, talking about investment and the next steps. And they emailed the .com. And so literally the .io, the company, had no idea that they weren't even getting the email. And I'm sure these people are saying are you kidding me? Why haven't you responded back to me? That confusion leads to it leads to just your very leadership being questioned, okay, in the minds of these people saying, hey, I'm still using this .com, I'm sending this to you. Now I have a crazy story. I remember one guy called me up. He had a domain name that was it had a Chinese, I can't remember the domain name, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you, but I seriously can't remember it. But anyways, it was there was a Chinese military company, defense contractor that also had a very similar domain name with another extension, and he opened up a catch-all email address, and he was getting these emails. and he called me. He's like, "Listen, Chris," he's like, "Yeah, my computer's been hacked. I'm getting threats." He's like, "This is pretty crazy." He's like, "I just want to get rid of this thing now." Anyways, I've never heard from him again. I have no idea. This was years ago. I don't know if he's even still alive. Who knows, But it was pretty crazy. Email security, super important. But global positioning, workforce.com, Workforce Software. You're going to hear this on a lot of my stories because I think it's just a great story. It's a great example. Just don't do it. Don't do it. If you can't get your .com, launch on something else. Find another brand. The confusion that you're going to create is going to impact your brand. And if another company comes along, or if the company that owns it comes along and decides they're going to build it out, and you created all this momentum behind you, and it creates confusion, very similar to this, nothing you can do. Literally, it's the biggest risk you have. You're scaling. There's nothing listen, even if Workforce Software put 20, 30 million into their advertising, they're just the amount of confusion they're going to create as they scale up. They're just going to drive more consumers to workforce.com because it's just natural. People are going to say, well, hey, there's this natural like evolution, the natural path to purchase. Okay, you want something, you're looking for a company that does it. Maybe it's you find them, but then you go back and you look at the category of people who do, the category. Well, I'm going to leave it there. Okay, I'm going long here today. I'm at 15 minutes, almost 16 minutes. So. Use this example up. Share this video up. Listen, if you're selling a domain name, you share this up, okay? Because this is good information here. Hopefully, this will help you to sell your domain name. If you're a company and you're on the edge and saying, "Well, do we need to own it? Do we not need to own it?" Buy it. It's the biggest risk you have to scaling, and most of the time the ROI, if you're honest, it's worth like 10, maybe even 100 times more than the cost of the domain name to your brand. Truly is. I mean, one of the examples I use is like, what do you pay one salesperson? Okay, let's say it's $150,000 a year. Is it worth, the cost of maybe 2 salespeople, maybe 3 salespeople, maybe 1, maybe a half a salesperson? Yeah, of course it is, because you own your brand. You've boxed in any future brand that's going to come along that wants to launch on the raw version of your brand. You've boxed them in forever. Okay, if you found value in this puppy, share this video, share it up. Going over to chriszuiker.com, downloadmybook.com, strategies. It's on the links below. Also, check my podcast out. Listen, I'm on episode 700 something, maybe 700. Done a lot of episodes. It's a daily 5 to 10 minute podcast, and I go over all these examples and more. My negotiation tips and tricks, and just in general, motivation, leadership. Check it out, my podcast, and share this up. You just got done listening to another episode of .com Strategies. Check us out online at chriszuiker.com and at mediaoptions.com.